Well, howdy, howdy, ho. I didn't see you there. No, I did. I knew you were going to be there the whole time, listening in with bated breath. Speaking of bated breath, you're going to learn in this podcast episode how to have your cake and eat it too. No, really, literally, have your cake and eat it too, because I'm interviewing guys who have invented a way for your body to be able to digest gluten. Now, before we jump into this discussion of eating bread and pasta and other wonderful gluten goodies, I want to tell you about something else that's very good, and that is a way to get better, earmuffs kids, erections, better sex, and better orgasms. There is a new technology that uses pulsating sound waves to increase blood flow to your nether regions. And this not only enhances the length of your orgasm and the quality of your sexual performance, but it gives you bigger, bolder erections, guys. The sound waves from this thing encourage the growth of new blood vessels that increase both oxygen and nutrients to your crotch. So why wouldn't anyone want to have better sex or just more sex in general? I tried this. It works. It is a procedure called Gainswave. It's called Gainswave. It's overseen by a medical practitioner. There's no pills. There's no pharmaceuticals. No supplements to take. You just go in, you get the treatment, boom, done, and you're off to the races. Now, you can get 6 treatments from them, and they're going to give you a free one. If you get 12 treatments, you'll get the 13th for free. And you can check this out at gainswave.com/Ben. That's gainswave.com/Ben. I've personally had 7 procedures done. This thing works like gangbusters. I consider it to be better living through science. And again, you can try it out. They've got dozens and dozens of practitioners all over the nation who do this, so you're guaranteed to be able to find something near you if you live in America. So you go to gainswave.com/Ben. This podcast is also brought to you by the purest omega-3 supplement on the market. It's called O-Max. They call it O-Max 3 Ultra Pure. It's almost 94% pure omega-3 fatty acids. Now, most of the brands you see at the store, those are about 30% pure omega-3 fatty acids. So O-Max blows all these other ones out of the water. They use an EPA to DHA ratio of 4-to-1. And that's specifically engineered for inflammation and for joint pain. And they have a really intense distillation process in Europe where they remove toxins, PCBs, excess saturated fat. So all you're left with are ultra pure omega-3 fatty acids. And they even have this cool thing they do called the freezer test challenge, which basically means if you freeze most other omega-3 supplements, they get cloudy, and that's all the filler. But the Omax 3 soft gels remain totally clear because they're that pure. And no, you do not get fish burps from them because they're that pure. Clinically tested, it's certified, it's sustainably sourced. You just go to tryomax.com/Ben. That's tryomax.com/Ben. That gets you 60% off a 1-month supply of Ultra Pure plus free shipping and their 60-day money-back guarantee. So you go to tryomax.com/Ben to take advantage of those savings. 60% off a 1-month supply, and this is your chance to try the most trusted omega-3 on the market. tryomax.com/Ben.
He's an expert in human performance and nutrition. Voted America's top personal trainer and one of the globe's most influential people in health and fitness. His show provides you with everything you need to optimize physical and mental performance. He is Ben Greenfield.
Power, speed, mobility, balance. Whatever it is for you, that's the natural movement. Get out there. When you look at all the studies done, studies that have shown the greatest efficacy.
All the information you need in one place, right here, right now, on the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast.
Hey folks, it's Ben Greenfield, and I've been getting a lot of questions lately about this mysterious molecule that I consume these days before I eat any bread or pasta. It's a compound that allows me to digest gluten. without any of the bathroom decommissioning that so notoriously occurs after a hefty bout of gluten consumption. Basically, it's the way I've been able to gorge on delicious gluten-filled foods without feeling like I swallowed a pair of motor-powered scissors tearing up my intestines, as they say. I don't know if they say that, but I just said it. So anyways, I don't want to not eat bread or pasta for the rest of my life. I recently posted to Instagram my children and I eating at this place called Wild Sage here in Spokane. And one of the lovely things they bring out when you eat at Wild Sage are popovers, and they fill them with lavender butter. And they're amazing, but they're also highly gluten-filled. And I still want to eat them. So I've been using this molecule that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about on today's show, along with my guests, because whether due to glyphosate exposure from pesticides and herbicides, or stress, or a leaky gut, there are a host of modern assailants that I think make gluten a bigger issue than it ever has been in human history. And I want to delve into a little bit of better living through science to actually make gluten digestible. The guys who I'm about to speak with and who you're about to hear from have actually been on the podcast before. We did a podcast called Probiotic Enemas, Digestive Enzyme Myths, Breathing 10 kilograms of Oxygen, Low Protein Diets, and more. And I'll link to that previous episode with these cats if you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/gluten podcast. That's bengreenfieldfitness.com/gluten podcast. Anyways, their names are Matt Gallant and Wade Lightheart. Matt's an entrepreneur. He's a poker champion. He's an ex-rock guitarist. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's built 13 companies in the last 20 years. He's a strength conditioning coach with a degree in kinesiology, and he's the CEO of a company called BiOptimizers. And Wade is actually a 3-time all-natural bodybuilding champion, happens to be vegan as well. He's an advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute. He's co-founder of BiOptimizers along with Matt, and he's written some books like Staying Alive in the Toxic World and another book called The Wealthy Backpacker. So these guys are interesting fellows, chock full of information, and today chock full of gluten. So welcome to the show, guys.
Great to be here.
I always love talking with you, Ben, so we're excited.
Word. Are you guys like punishing a baguette right now, or some gluten powder?
That was yesterday. I keep it to Sunday as my spike days, so usually eat 6,000 to 10,000 calories in a day. And I got to say, the molecule we're going to talk about was a game changer because sometimes even with the other types of enzymes we use, there was still some digestive stress, but now it's totally pain-free and fun.
That's Matt talking, by the way, for those of you listening in. Matt, did you see 6,000 to 10,000 calories?
Correct.
On every Sunday?
Pretty much, yeah.
Why?
For the caloric spike, primarily. So, for 6 days and do one meal a day, thanks to your guidance. Thanks for that. And then on the 7th day, I spike. So I reload my glycogen. It's extremely anabolic. I've been able to build about 27 pounds of lean tissue in the last 3 years while burning body fat doing this.
Geez, so you're doing one meal a day for 6 days in a row, and then on that last day, are you eating 3 meals a day, or is that still one meal that you're eating 6,000 calories to 10,000 calories?
No, it's kind of eating all day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Healthy stuff or just anything?
A little bit of both. I'd say it's probably half and half. So I do like making some really rich, fun kind of superfood desserts. And then, I'll go get a burger and might eat some pizza, might eat some pasta, might go to the theater or whatever.
Wow.
But, it's fun.
How do you feel the next day?
Good. Today I feel awesome. I went, just trained this morning, fasted. When you're keto too, I mean, you're burning glycogen Monday, Tuesday, and a little bit Wednesday. By Wednesday, most of the glycogen's gone. But it does give me a boost in the gym for Monday, Tuesday. And I'm still got ketones. I'll measure my ketones on Monday. It's still usually around 0.5 because I've been on ketosis so long.
Wow.
So basically I'm dual fuel.
All right, last question before we talk about gluten. But are you training on that day where you're eating all that food, or are you just training on those days where you're doing one meal a day and then taking that day off where you're eating all the calories?
I'm taking it off. I do believe I'd probably get even more muscle gains if I did train on it because insulin's incredibly anabolic. I mean, that's why a lot of pro bodybuilders inject it.
Yeah.
But I like taking Sundays off, so for that reason, I don't.
Wow. Interesting. That sounds like an exhausting Sunday, just eating all day long. No breaks.
I find it fun, but yeah, to each his own.
Wow. Okay. Well, I want to talk about how you incorporate this concept of enzymes. And we have a whole previous podcast on the digestive enzymes that you use. And we'll talk a little bit more about enzymes as well, because you also have an article on my website called How to Take Digestive Enzymes. And I'll link to that too over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/gluten podcast. But I want to start here. I think a lot of folks nowadays are aware that gluten can cause issues even if you don't have celiac disease. And there are books about this, like Grain Brain, for example, that delve into the neuroinflammatory aspects of gluten, even if it doesn't cause any type of stomach distress. But in your opinion, I'd like you to just talk about that a little bit, especially for people who might be unfamiliar with why we should still be cognizant of our gluten intake, even if we don't have celiac disease per se.
Well, the New England Journal of Medicine listed 55 diseases that can be caused by eating gluten. And the real big issue is about 99% of the people that are sensitive to gluten don't know it. And a lot of the diseases are primarily immune, neurological, and even psychiatric. So among them, we're talking depression, schizophrenia, epilepsy, migraines, neuropathy, anxiety, dementia, autism. And, as a whole, autoimmunity is the third leading cause of death in the world. So inflammation, it's not just the gluten too. I mean, when you're eating a lot of this stuff, the inflammation from the wheat can be a problem. And not just the gluten, but amylase, trypsin inhibitors, ATIs, what they're called, can provoke an inflammatory immune response in the GI tract by stimulating immune cells. And that occurs in people regardless of whether they are celiac or not. And another one, too, for the non-celiac crowd is the wheat germs. Gluten is an inflammatory immune-disrupting protein found in wheat. And despite the similar name, it's not the same thing as gluten.
What's the difference between wheat germ and gluten?
Well, it's just another type of protein.
Okay. Also resistant to digestion?
Yes.
Okay. And then these amylase trypsin inhibitors you talked about, that's an inflammatory molecule that is similar to gluten or simply comes packaged along with gluten?
It comes packaged. It's specifically in wheat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, specifically in wheat. And then the thing, too, and I know you're going to talk about leaky gut, but I think a lot of, especially like the wheat germ, gluten, it can just provoke an inflammatory response in the gut cells and disturb the natural immune barrier in the gut, which makes the gut more permeable. So then you start getting leaky gut. So a lot of this stuff, so leaky gut, in our research is caused a lot by the wheats. And it's obviously extremely problematic for a lot of reasons that I'm sure your audience is familiar with.
Well, what do you think about this idea, though, that, and I hear this thrown around by a lot of gastroenterologists, for example, that it's not gluten that's the problem, right? It's the fact that, say, people have leaky guts from stress or from an antibiotic regimen or from not enough fermented food intake, and so they've got a slightly permeable gut lining, or they've been exposed to glyphosate, which we know can also wreak some havoc on the gut and render it somewhat more permeable. And that if we address those variables, right, like fix leaky gut and eat foods that do not contain glyphosate or use supplements, like I've talked before about a supplement like Restore, right, which helps to protect the gut from the ravages of glyphosate, that we wouldn't have to worry about gluten.
Yeah. Wade, do you want to tackle the glyphosate question?
Yeah, it's a great thing, and our research is indicating a couple interesting things about glyphosate. Number one is they've done testing from the 40s relative to now, and we're seeing a 4%, a 4x increase in the diagnosis of celiac disease. And what they're tracing it to is glyphosates and how it's interrupting the digestive. So let's say the whole digestive process, particularly with how it's affecting protein assimilation. It's also altering the microbiome or the microbiotic environment, changing how the bacteria growth inside our bodies. And what's interesting, there was a study, I think in 2009, was showing how glyphosate doesn't just affect gluten, but it can affect the activity of protease, lipase, and amylase. So I think there's a combination of factors. I think there is a definitely a certain percentage of the population has trouble with gluten, but this percentage is going to continue to increase because of the exposure of glyphosates. And this was also with fish. So they were finding the glyphosate in fish. So people are eating, let's say, fish in their diets, and they're getting glyphosate through that process, which is disrupting the microvilli structure in the intestinal tract. So it's a much more serious condition than people initially thought of, and it's also proliferating into other food options.
Okay, so what I'm asking, though, is if we didn't have leaky gut and there wasn't any glyphosate, could we just eat bread and have it not be an issue? And this also relates to the fact that, as I'm sure you've heard, a lot of people will say, hey, I went to Europe, went on vacation, had a pizza in Rome, or I had some pasta somewhere in France, and I didn't have the same issues as I had in the U.S.
It's a good question, and I know what's interesting, if you go back in the research in 1900, the U.S. Congress was concerned about the degradation of protein content inside of wheat. And what was interesting, after World War II, we went into monoculture farming and we started using a lot of different chemical agents and stuff. So I think one of the issues is protein degradation in food, the use of monoculture, the expansion of or the diminishment of the nutrient quality of food. So if you look at, are you eating from a Mennonite farm food versus, something that's come from your Monsanto seeds that are being proliferated. So I think to answer your question shortly, maybe the reality of that, though, I think is very difficult for people in the modern world.
But what I was saying earlier about the wheat germ, agglutinin, is that it does seem to create leaky gut in of itself, which is, again, different than gluten. So, and I think the answer is always it's a combination. Of course, as scientists, we want to isolate things, right? We love to isolate variables and we want very clear culprits. But in the real world, we always know it's a synergistic combination of everything, right? So why is Ben Greenfield sub 7% body fat? It's not one thing, right? It's the exercise, the cold exposure, the keto, the intermittent fasting, the supplement, all the other lifestyle things you do.
My parents.
Right, genetics. So, again, I think it's the same thing with health problems, and in this case, gluten. I mean, most likely, it's a destructive synergistic combination of leaky gut, glyphosates, and a lack of DPP-4, which we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I want to talk about DPP-4, but I mean, I'm surprised that neither of you guys have brought this up, but there is this idea, of course, that all plants have a natural built-in defense mechanism, and that must be rendered inactive in order for us to be able to digest the plant. This is why you rinse the saponins off of quinoa. You don't just buy quinoa from Costco and go cook it, which a lot of people do, then complain they've got quinoa in their crap and they didn't digest it and their body just must be allergic to quinoa. You have to actually soak and rinse the quinoa. And you could say the same thing for rinsing brown rice, or you could say the same thing for like sprouting or at least soaking lentils so they don't give you horrible gas. I mean, in my opinion, I think that to a certain extent it comes down to how the food is actually prepared as well. Like I eat sourdough bread, for example, and I can't get sourdough bread when I'm out at a restaurant, which is when I actually use quite frequently this DPP-4 stuff that we're going to talk about. But I'll eat my wife's sourdough bread that's been soaked and been sprouted and fermented, and a lot of the gluten has been pre-digested, and the glycemic index gets lower when you eat that bread. So I think part of it comes down to the actual food preparation methods, does it not?
100%. Absolutely. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd be eating pre-digested food exclusively. But when you can't, which is most of the time, that's where enzymes come in, because enzymes will help break stuff down. So that's the thing. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd be using probiotics and enzymes to literally break down the food before you eat it. And we talked about this in our last podcast about using even enzymes in your shake and drinking it while you work out, which has been shown to improve results from a workout significantly. So, yeah, pre-digested foods, the ultimate, really is.
Yeah, that's part of the research, and I'm sure that you, as a vegan bodybuilder, looked into this, Wade, that idea that if you consume digestive enzymes when you take a plant-based protein, like a hemp or a rice or a pea, there's actually research that shows that the protein in that becomes as bioavailable as what you get from like a whey or an egg protein.
Well, that's exactly what was the original design of why I was so interested in enzymes, and particularly proteolytic enzymes, about being on a plant-based diet. of course, there was not even hardly any plant proteins back when I started that. One of the reasons we cultivated and developed that product, Masszymes, is particularly to break down so I could get the amino acids out of the food that I was eating, because I was eating such a low protein diet with a high protein requirement because of the sport I was in. So that's kind of started it, and then that cascaded into all these other applications that enzymes have, and we haven't looked back ever since.
Okay, so I do have, before we get into how these enzymes actually work and what happens when you consume an enzyme along with something like bread, I wanted to ask you guys about actual testing for gluten and whether or not you recommend any type of test to see whether or not you have some kind of reactivity to wheat. And also whether or not you have any type of issue with cross-reactivity, if either of you guys want to speak to cross-reactivity.
Yeah, so if you want to get we'll probably put a link to this, but basically you want what's called an anti-tissue transglutaminase antibody, TTG and TTGA, or an endomysial antibody, EMA, DGP, ARR, total IgA. So that's the testing. It's pretty, you're going to have someone that understands that. But of course, one of the panels that I think is great is a Cyrex panel. To summarize that, you can look that up for gluten sensitivity, or that's
what you just described is the Cyrex panel. That's the array that they use. Okay.
Some people like to go depth, though. They want to know all of it.
They have their array 4, which is the one called gluten-associated cross-reactive foods and food sensitivities, and that's one where you could find out whether or not, for example, cow's milk or caffeine. I know coffee is a big one. They do potato, they do sesame, they do quinoa. You can find out if any of these foods, if consumed along with gluten, wind up making you even more susceptible to how gluten could deleteriously affect your digestive tract. That's how these are working.
Correct. And also, they're also testing to see, one of the things they're looking at is gliadin peptide antibodies. So gliadin is kind of the big culprit in gluten that creates a lot of problems, and then your body starts producing antibodies, and that's what starts triggering these anti-immune responses in the body that can be leading to leaky gut and all this other stuff that goes on, where you're literally breaking down your system, and that's what they're testing for as well.
I mean, you guys mentioned wheat germ agglutinin and gluten, but they test for, there's a whole bunch of stuff, alpha gliadin and gamma gliadin, and they look at like microbial transglutaminase. They've got a whole host of things that they look at on those panels. So they get pretty in depth in terms of being able to tell you whether or not you're truly sensitive to gluten, or maybe you're not even sensitive to it, but it's more like glyphosate, it's leaky gut, it's the fact that you're consuming sources of gluten that haven't been properly soaked or sprouted or fermented, etc.
Exactly.
Okay. So what I'll do is, and by the way, for those of you listening in, that's array. If you go to Cyrex, they call them arrays, ARRAY, arrays, and that's array 3X and array 4. The one I usually recommend is array 10, which just tests you for all sorts of different food immune reactivities. But if you really want to dial in gluten and just know beyond a shadow of a doubt what things you might be allergic to when it comes to bread or gluten, or things that when consumed along with those would make them more reactive, you would want that array 3X and array 4. I think those are the two. So I'll link to those. They're blood tests. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but a doc has to order those, don't they?
Probably in the States, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the fun things living in the United States, which I don't, but
yeah. But in Canada, are you guys able to just order from a website?
I mean, I live in Panama, so that you can just pretty much do whatever you want all the time.
Yeah, I had forgotten you're in Panama. But aren't you up in Canada, Wade?
Not at the moment. No, but most of your tests still need to be ordered by a doctor in Canada as well.
Okay, gotcha. Where do you live, Wade?
That's a great question. Right now, I'm hanging out in Santa Monica.
Okay, all right. You're kind of nomadic, or
deeply nomadic.
That's right. You have a book called The Wealthy Backpacker.
Correct.
All right. Well, we won't go down that rabbit hole. Okay, so last time... Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so how can gluten negatively affect the brain? Well, first, gluten can inflame the brain by causing an autoimmune response. So autoimmunity is an abnormal response to the body's own tissues. In other words, something comes into the body and the body goes on alert, but somehow mistakes its own tissues as a foreign invader and declares war mistakenly upon itself. So allergies is a great example of that. In this case, antibodies meant to fight gluten also attack your body. Second, during the digestive process, gluten can be broken down to strange proteins that are a lot like psychedelic drugs. these opium-like proteins called gliadorphins, also known as kind of gluteomorphine. As you probably imagine, these can drastically change brain function and behavior. And I think that's one of the reasons people get so hooked on pasta, for example. I mean, people talk about that all the time. And then the third way is by really overloading the brain with glutamate, which people that are familiar with MSG knows that's what it does. So that accelerates, activates, irritates, and damages brain cells when you got too much of them. So the excessivity is obviously linked to psychiatric disorders because glutamate's an excitotoxin. So those are the big issues. And the real big issue, too, I know a lot of people say, well, I don't have any gluten in my house. You know, my wife's celiac. But, you know, she's scared to go to almost any restaurant. She used to be scared before Gluten Guardian came out. But the problem is, unless a restaurant is like a hardcore raw food place that has no gluten in the kitchen at all, it's almost impossible to avoid it because the whole kitchen's contaminated. So those are the real issues besides just the bloating and all the other things that people are familiar with.
Yeah, those opioids you talked about, they're not only found in gluten, but they're also found in dairy. You'll find a lot of people when they go on a gluten-free diet or casein-free diet, and I actually want to talk with you about casein and casein pre-digestion as well. They experience withdrawal symptoms, and a lot of times they think it's like keto flu, or they went low carb, or there's something else in the diet causing issues, and in fact, you can be addicted to this. It can be like coming off coffee, but almost more profound in terms of noticeable symptoms, simply because the opioids in a lot of these foods. If you do go gluten-free cold turkey, because gluten has almost like this morphine-like addictive property to it, gluten and the casein in dairy.
Yeah, I used to be a big casein fan. It was one of my first shifts when I started moving into a more plant-based diet. And of course, that was the tradition in Ayurvedic, would use casein. And then I ran into a whole lot of troubles down the road with that. And what's interesting is the China study talked about, I believe it was that high levels of casein, anything that was around 10%, they noticed an increase in tumor growth for people who had a 10% casein diet, and it fell below if it was below 5%. And all of that's related to the A1 inflammatory proteins. And so I think that, that again, there's going back to compound factors that are causing inflammation in the body, the silent killer that you don't necessarily feel initially, but later on it cultivates into other issues. I mean, the average person who gets diagnosed with celiac or gluten intolerance, for example, is between ages of 40 and 65, because basically they've had symptoms that they didn't necessarily realize, whether it was abdominal pain, headaches, anemia, joint pain, muscle pain, brain fog, all these different things, psoriasis, depression. These can all be caused by the inability to process these inflammatory proteins in gluten, also, and in casein.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's something that I don't talk about a lot on the show, but it is that A1 versus A2 issue. The beta-casomorphin in A1 milk, that's the one that's the opioid-like peptide that causes almost like that addictive withdrawal property when you consume A1 milk. And also there are a lot of other issues. You get increased risk of diabetes, increased risk of heart disease. They've linked it to like sudden infant death syndrome and autism. Like there's a lot of issues with drinking A1 cow's milk, but the majority, the lion's share of the milk in the U.S. actually is A1 milk, unless you specifically go out and you can Google A2 milk. Like there's one company in the U.S. called the A2 Milk Company. You can avoid milk, period, unless it's like cheeses from Europe and things like that. Or you can use goat milk or camel milk, or I know one that's kind of up and coming right now as far as being healthy for the body is like water buffalo milk. And I don't know who's milking the water buffaloes or where all those water buffaloes are kept. But ultimately, yeah, that's a big issue as well, completely separate from gluten. But I think people need to be aware that a lot of these enzymatic issues that we talk about and the use of enzymes can at least control the susceptibility to some of the opioid-like properties of these.
And just to highlight the glyphosate issue too, because maybe some people listening aren't aware, they're the ones used by the great evil empire Monsanto, who's been bought out by Bayer. And the issue is what it does, it basically damages the intestinal tract. And Wade, you want to go on a rant on Monsanto, because anybody who's clued in, I mean, they could be potentially the most evil company in the world, in my opinion, a lot of people's opinions. And I think Wade's got a good rant for us queued up here.
Yeah, well, not to go too crazy, but the bottom line is when there's smoke, there's fire. And during the last administration in the United States, they were written into protection against lawsuits from the Constitution. And now the first company in history to have that put forth. And of course, a lot of the former chief executive officers were actually working as advisors in the previous administration in the United States. And so that's always a big question mark. And the other thing is it's pretty demonstrable evidence, the level of damage that does inside the intestinal tract. And so the question is why is this company being protected? Why is this product being all over there? And why are we seeing a correlation with all these increased digestive related illnesses with the massive use of this product? And then suddenly this company has now been bought by a large pharmaceutical enterprise in Germany. And so I think it raises a lot of questions that people need to be educated about. And I'm grateful to be on your podcast to kind of share some of these things. Because, when you start tracking these things down, it just makes it why you need to pay attention to what you're doing, what you're eating, and our food has essentially been mutated and not to our advantage in all cases.
And just to highlight how evil these guys are, in India, there were farmers that didn't want to use their seeds. So what they did, they built some farms near these farmers. Then, of course, with the wind, there was cross-contamination. And they sued them because they have patented seeds. So they destroyed these farmers' livelihood. We could keep going on and on, which I know it's not the point of the podcast today, but I think it's good to bring awareness to this problem.
Hey, I want to interrupt today's show to get all ketogenic on you. I know that's it's kind of a catchphrase these days, ketogenic. But there's this website where you can actually access some of the most potent ketogenic superfoods that exist. They've got grass-fed ghee, chipotle lime mayonnaise, organic pecan halves, organic virgin coconut oil, of course, but also organic extra virgin olive oil, which in my opinion is just as important as coconut oil anytime you're eating a high-fat diet. And then they've got things like apple cider vinegar and coconut aminos and cacao powder and things that help to step up the flavor of a ketogenic diet, so you're not just like gnawing on a stick of butter all day. So this website that has all of this actually has search functions that allow you to not only search and narrow down your search using filters for ketogenic, but also paleo, gluten-free, vegan, kosher, you name it. And it's all non-GMO, sustainably farmed, fair trade certified, BPA-free, all of that with one click of a button. This is all what you will find at Thrive Market, which is this online marketplace that makes healthy living easy and affordable. A bunch of their stuff you can't find on Amazon. Over 70% of their stuff you can't find on Amazon, and it's always at 25 to 50% below traditional retail prices. So it's way more affordable than going to the fancy overpriced health food store to get this stuff. Now, the cool thing is you also get 25% off of your first order when you go to Thrive Market. Very simple. You just go to thrivemarket.com/Ben. That's thrivemarket.com/Ben. And you can go and do that ketogenic search that I mentioned or anything else. They have a host of incredibly flavorful foods. May I recommend you also try the coconut meat cereal, which is quite amazing. It allows you to have cereal in the morning, just like you used to when you were a kid, but without the diabetes. So check it out. thrivemarket.com/Ben. This podcast is also brought to you by the secret weapon of cold. And I'm totally not kidding here. There is a brand new, I guess you would call this almost like a biohack for testosterone. It is the world's most advanced cold pack for your nutsack. That's right, fellas. It's called the Jetpack. So the idea is that, as you probably know, your balls are where the lion's share of your testosterone is produced. And when you ice your balls or you keep them cold, what happens is they upregulate your testosterone production. And this brilliant company called Primal Cold has actually developed a special cooling pack that is designed to cradle your balls. And the other cool thing is that, unlike most of the gel packs you're going to find on, say, Amazon, which are made in China using PVC, and trust me, you don't want PVC on your nuts. This stuff's clean, completely non-toxic. It's made by an FDA-registered company, handmade in North America. So that cold pack you're putting on your balls, you have the peace of mind knowing that's handmade. Now, you get to make cold your secret weapon and get 15% off your order when you go to Primal Cold, just like it sounds, Primal Cold. You go to primalcold.com and you use code BEN at checkout. That'll give you the savings, 15% discount on an ice pack for your nuts, fellas. Isn't that cool? Primalcold.com. Enter code BEN. Enjoy to the extent that you can enjoy icing your balls. Yeah, it is kind of scary since Monsanto kind of has a hand in pretty much every major subsidized food, at least in Canada and the U.S., like corn and soy. So if a farmer wants to get a break on the cost of their food production, they're likely going to have to receive those savings on like a Monsanto brand product because they have such a dominant position, at least in North American agriculture. So it's kind of a shitty scenario for a lot of farmers.
And for the population, because at the end of the day, how this product works, if you look at glyphosates, what they actually do is they interrupt the enzymatic function of all these various bugs that they're supposedly trying to protect people from. And the question I always ask is, well, how much of this stuff do I actually have to consume before it disrupts the enzymatic function in my body and damages the microbiome inside my body? And the evidence is mounting up to say not that much.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's actually how glyphosate is working. It's actually targeting enzymes and then potentially inhibiting your own enzyme production or damaging your own enzymes upon consumption.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, enzymes, there's over 25,000 different enzymatic functions inside the body. And we don't know what the cascading effects are. But one thing that we do know is people are getting fatter and people are having more depression. And there's a lot more dysfunction relative to digestion in the population. And so, again, we can't say it's a causality, but certainly I believe it's correlative.
All right, I want to get back to these 6,000 to 10,000 calorie days that Matt is embarking upon, and and this idea of pre-digesting it. So last time we were together, Matt, you told me you had this stuff that you could sprinkle on bread, and you could actually watch the bread digest when you sprinkled this stuff on bread. So get into the science of what exactly you were using and how an enzyme that pre-digests gluten is actually working.
Yeah, so the enzyme we've been alluding to the entire podcast called dipeptidyl peptidase 4. It's a proteolytic enzyme, which means it helps break down protein, which is what gluten is.
You can just abbreviate that DPP-4 if you want, right?
Correct, yeah. So we'll just use DPP-4 moving forward. It's a really simple experiment. I took 2 big pieces of bread, put them in a bowl with water, and I sprinkled a few capsules of Gluten Guardian, which has the DPP-4 in it, and it dissolved the bread in 15 minutes. And people can go to the link, which Ben will link, and you can see the experiment for yourself.
Oh, you have a video of it?
Yeah, I did a time-lapse video of it.
Oh, sick.
So you can see it. It's awesome. And basically the way it works is gluten's a protein, and the DPP-4 is a proteolytic enzyme that'll break it down. And we also combined 4 other proteolytic enzymes, which helps break down other types of proteins. Because, again, the reason is most people eat protein with the gluten. For example, if you eat a hamburger or a pizza, it's not just gluten, right? There's bread and meat and stuff. So we use a variety of proteases that work at different pH levels because the pH levels change several times as it passes through the intestinal tract, starting in your stomach, and then there's acid buffers, and it changes again the small intestine and large intestine. And then we have also 3 types of amylase, which helps break down the carbs. So we got glucoamylase, which is an important digestive enzyme because it helps absorb nutrients and creates energy from some of the common plant foods that we eat. It does this by breaking down the starch that occurs in a lot of naturally in a lot of vegetables. So this starch is presented in high amounts in common foods like potato, corn, rice, etc. And also it adds as a filter in processing a lot of different prepared foods. Then we got the way the glucoamylase works, it cleaves and breaks off a glucose molecule at the end of the starch polysaccharide molecules and basically breaks it down so you can use it. And it digests the starches. And then from there, we also have another enzyme called bacterial amylase and amylase, which helps break down the starches and carbs, again, at various pH levels. So that's the formulation, and that's how it works.
Okay, so when you do something like this, is this something that you actually break open and sprinkle on your food, or do you take this before you eat, after you eat? Like, how's it work?
I just take it while I eat, so before I eat, I just grab the food. But yeah, because if you sprinkle your bread with it, like I just described, in water, it's not going to be a very good culinary experience. No. Because it just becomes mush.
Your sandwich is going to turn into a soup.
Exactly.
That's great. I actually have a bottle. I both my kids have a bottle too, for when they go to birthday parties or when they're at school and if they have any gluten, and I just give them a bottle. I bought them both a fanny pack, and sometimes I'll put it in their fanny pack or in their backpack, but they have a bottle and they use it when they're doing their foodie thing or when they're at a birthday party. But what I wanted to ask you when it comes to this pre-digestion is, it's one thing to pre-digest it, but do you actually see a reduction in symptoms, or has this been studied when it comes to alleviating symptoms? I mean, is it breaking it down to the point where there are people, with gluten reactivity issues who actually aren't feeling that?
Well, it all becomes a matter of dosage. So if you're a celiac and you're eating a 12-inch pizza, you're going to need a pretty high amount. So I think, because I've done some tests with my wife, we went to a wedding on Saturday night. She ate some gluten, which she rarely does, and we came back and she took some Gluten Guardian and she felt good. So,
she took it after?
Yeah, because I didn't bring it. That was a loser move on my part. So we took it the next day, and she felt a lot better. So it does alleviate, but ideally you taking it with the food. Because then the capsules are going to open up the intestinal tract and it'll break it down as it's getting digested.
Okay, so when you're using this, it sounds like you've got enough in there to where you wouldn't actually need to take like a separate bitters or a separate digestive enzyme?
Depends what you're eating. If you're eating a lot of meats, and again, when I'm keto, I don't use Gluten Guardian. Unless I was eating gluten with it, but that's when I use Masszymes, which we talked about a lot in our first podcast.
Masszymes is the one that's high in protease for breaking down proteins like steak, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we're actually working on a keto-based enzyme, which is going to come out next year. So we'll come back and talk about that. But so ideally, our goal is to be the digestive company, create different solutions for different types of meals and different types of diets. And really, when you're eating gluten, Gluten Guardian is your friend.
So if you were at like a steakhouse and they were bringing out bread with the steak, and I actually like to have, like, when I'm at a steakhouse, I like to have a big old chunk of the bread that they bring out, and I'll sprinkle salt on it, and usually a good butter. I enjoy that as a steakhouse, with my pre-steak cocktail, and then I have my steak and a glass of wine. Like my go-to is I'll have a wedge salad, and I know all the orthorexic out there just took a sharp intake of breath because I'm getting blue cheese and bacon and God knows what else on the wedge salad. And then I have a steak and I have a glass of wine with a steak. I always ask for organic, biodynamic wine, and look for a grass-fed, grass-finished steak. And I actually do pay attention to the ingredients on the wedge salad and often ask for the dressing on the side because usually they use too much, etc. But yeah, typically I'll do a Moscow Mule or some kind of like bitter-rich, digestif-rich cocktail and the salad, and then I'll have a couple slices of the bread with the salt and the butter, and then I'll order whatever cut of steak I want with it, like a good glass of organic biodynamic wine. But what I could do is take something like Gluten Guardian right when I get there, before all the appetizers and the bread and everything come out, and then I could take something like the Masszymes right before the steak comes out.
Yeah, that's what I would do. That's what I do. When I have those types of meals, I'll have 3 to 5 capsules of Gluten Guardian and about 5 capsules of Masszymes. And by the way, and you're not going to be happy to hear this, but again, it's just another reason to take DPP-4. A lot of the stuff that you eat, including wine and blueberries, is basically all the berry and citrus polyphenols have been found to inhibit DPP-4. So when you do take or drink those, definitely take a few Gluten Guardians with it.
And it's not something like a chemical that's added to the wine or the polyphenols. You're simply saying polyphenols inhibit DPP-4 activity?
Correct. And we'll put a link in the show notes so you can see the study on that.
I wonder why nature would have had that kind of built-in mechanism. That seems odd.
It's a good question. It does. DPP-4 inhibitors, some diabetics use it because, and Wade can maybe get into this, but yeah, so it has to do a little bit with the insulin. Wade, you want to get into it?
Yeah, DPP-4 can break down various hormones inside the body, particularly like things like insulin or something. So, which has a short half-life. So that's where it can interrupt some of that function for various people.
All right. So when it comes to the wheat germ agglutinin and some of the other things we talked about, like the alpha-trypsin inhibitors, does this have any type of effect on things other than gluten that would be found in gluten-containing foods?
Yeah. It helps break those down as well as break down casein, which we talked about earlier. So that's what's awesome. So again, not just when you're taking gluten, but as Wade talked about with the casein, when you are having any type of, especially again the A1, but any type of the milk proteins, definitely take some DPP-4 with it.
What about milk sugars like lactose?
Well, then you need lactase, which is a different enzyme.
Okay, is lactase in there at all?
We have that in the masszymes. So,
yeah.
But I will add one piece to this. If you're on a plant-based diet or you have a lot of plants in your diet, probably adding this in would be make a lot of sense because the chances that you're consuming glyphosates are pretty high, and so you need to have some sort of mechanism to break that down. And I think it's a good insurance policy if you're experiencing digestive-related illnesses. And what I've found is a lot of people just mix and match until they find their right combination.
Okay, got it. So basically, when it comes to glyphosate, you're saying that glyphosate inhibits, like you mentioned earlier, DPP-4. So even if you're consuming a plant and not necessarily eating bread, if you were to take something like Gluten Guardian before you're eating, let's say, a salad, and you didn't know if the salad was herbicide and pesticide free, you could consume that and it would not make as big an impact on downgrading your DPP levels.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a lot of testimonials of people that are anecdotally confirming that, people that were suffering for years didn't have any way to get out of it, and then they added this in, and all of a sudden the symptoms go away. So that's always a great indicator in the real world, as I like to call it, because sometimes we can get all lost and stuff is like, does this work?
Yeah. Now, what were you talking about with keto enzymes?
Yeah, so that's a new formulation we've been working on. It's really going to be designed for people on keto. So it's a variety of lipases and a bunch of other cofactors that'll help really people not just break down the fat, but utilize it. And it should really boost mitochondrial energy coming from fat. So we're really excited and should be coming out.
That's actually,
which, by the way, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's a good idea because a lot of people, they'll start on MCT oil or coconut oil or putting butter in their coffee, for example, and they wind up with digestive distress or big fatty floating stool, and it's because they're not actually breaking down the fats properly. And I think a lot of people don't realize there are actual enzymes that can break down fat.
Correct. Yeah, basically they're not producing enough lipase, which our friend Gary Lineman, he tested all of our products, and he loved Gluten Guardian. So he's not a gluten eater, but for him, he found that had the biggest impact. Just going back to the anecdotal stories. That's Gary Lineman, the Human Garage. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, Gary from the Human Garage. Yeah, I drew a blank there for a second. Yeah. So Gary's using this stuff as well, huh?
Yeah, he loves it. Yeah.
Okay. All right, got it. So you said you take 3 to 5 of the Gluten Guardian capsules, but then you'll add in the masszymes. Then if you were going to eat a high-fat meal, eventually once you have this lipase digestive enzyme, you'd add that in as well. Correct.
So the idea is to have basically, again, the right solutions for the right meals. Yeah. So if you're eating a lot of steaks, if you're eating pure protein, then masszymes is it. If you're eating a lot of fat, then this new source of product's going to be the solution. And when you're eating carbs, Gluten Guardian is your friend.
Got it. Okay, cool. Now, what about kids? I've been giving this to my boys, obviously. They're just taking 2, 3 max. I usually take 5 or 6 just because I eat larger pieces of bread than they do, and I'm a big old boy. But how about for kids? Is this okay for them to take?
Sure, no problems.
I ask after I feed it to my kids.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay,
yeah,
so I want to ask you guys too about your own diet, because I'm sure that people are curious. You alluded just a little bit to the fact that you have this massive, almost like cheat day on a Sunday, Matt, and then you've got this one meal a day on the other days. But that one meal a day, is it pretty hefty? Like, what's that one meal look like?
No, it's probably about 1,500 to 1,800 calories, pure keto. Ribeyes primarily, ribeyes, lamb, ground lamb, eggs and bacon. So basically it's a keto meal. And so basically I'm a calorie deficit, and I'll fast all day Saturday. So I eat for 5 days and then spike on Sunday. So my average calorie intake ends up being around 2,000 to 2,300 a week.
Yeah.
And my goal is just to keep recompositioning my body. So I've got goals, and I should be there in the next 2 years.
Interesting. What kind of weight training are you doing to actually put on that amount of mass while you're eating that meal plan scenario?
This changing all the time, but I just lift like 3 days a week right now, and it works very well. I do find that with the one meal a day, my recovery is not as good as it was eating more frequently. So I've trained as much as 5 days a week, but right now it's just 3 very challenging, hard weightlifting workouts.
Like full body, high rep, low weight, high weight, low rep. What's it look like?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. It's a push-pull split. So I just trained right before our call. Today was push day. So it was, bench, squats, barbell press, close grip bench, ball bearing split squats, flies, tricep push downs, and then side laterals. So that's push day. And then there's a pull day. So pull day will be deadlifts, barbell rows, pull-ups, barbell curls, and then some other moves. So it's either push, pull, and I alternate push, pull, push, pull. But that's my current
split. So that's 4 training sessions a week.
No, I do 3. So basically, it alternates each week. I got 8 workouts that I rotate through. But
I see. Pull. Okay, so over the course of a 2-week time span, you're hitting an even number of push and pulls.
Correct. And then Wade, what are you doing right now? Are you doing a 5-day body part split?
Yeah, I do a 5-day a week body part split, and I also add in 3 high intensity sprint sessions for about 15 minutes, which is. There's a little warm up, and then there's the little ends at the end. So that's my routine.
But you're still bodybuilding, right?
Well, certainly not in a competitive level. I'd say I'm competing against Father Time, like all of us.
Okay, and your meals, because you're not eating any meat. How does your meal day look? Are you doing the one a day also?
No, I experiment for periods of time. For me, I find I do better on a window of about 6 hours. So I'll eat, and I've done it both ways. I've done it like eating later in the day, and I've done it eating earlier in the day. And right now I find that eating earlier in the day, basically after I work out, is when I start eating, and then I'll eat for about 6 hours. So right now I train early in the morning around 6 a.m. and then my first meal will be 8, and I'll be done eating at 2 o'clock. And I'll stay in a fasted state till 2 o'clock. And then one day a week, I take in no calories for it works out to about 36 hours that I go into a fasted state. And the goal here, and I'm only consuming about 2,000 calories a day, but the goal here is reduction of body weight, body fat, and body weight. That's what I'm on right now. Yeah,
I'm blown away by the number of people who I talk to who are smart and savvy people in the industry who are fasting or have some element of fasting now on a regular basis. So, I'm doing a lot of it too.
I got to give Wade some credit because, Wade started we were talking about fasting a long time ago, and Wade was doing fasting, 15 years ago, Wade?
Yeah, I started that way back in, I guess it was 15. Yeah, 15 years ago, I started using it. I read a lot of science-related stuff from Indian culture, which has been quite common, and experimented with myself. And I just always thought it was a great adjunct to training and nutrition.
Yeah, Ayurvedic medicine has a rich history of fasting. Like for fasting and detoxification protocols, there's such a great number of books out there on it. Like one very simple one for that people could just start with is called "Change Your Day, Change Your Life," and I'll link to that in the show notes over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/gluten podcast. But that's a really good one just to begin to wrap your head around some of these timing and Ayurvedic principles when it comes to scheduling your diet and your exercise sessions. One other question that I had for you guys regarding the supplement piece was, I know that at BiOptimizers you have this thing called HCl, betaine hydrochloric acid, to increase stomach acid, which of course is important for activating a lot of enzymes. But when it comes to that, are you stacking HCl in at all with any of these compounds? I mean, how are you working that in?
Yeah, ideally the perfect meal would be, again, the enzymes, the HCl, which you only need about 2 capsules, and then P3OM, which is also proteolytic, which will also help break down the meal. So in every meal, you would have 2 capsules of HCl, maybe 2 or 3 capsules of P3OM, which is a proteolytic probiotic, and then the appropriate enzyme, whether it's Gluten Guardian or Mazymes or both, when Ben goes and has his bread and steak.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, that's when I use this stuff a lot of the time is when I'm at a restaurant. I have to admit, when I'm at home, like we have so many bitters and digestifs and natural compounds, and we're eating extremely clean and a lot of fermented, pre-digested food anyways. It's rare that I even use enzymes that much when I'm at home. But as soon as I travel, I mean, I've got... Well, right now I've got the Gluten Guardian that I throw in my bag, and I've been kind of agnostic lately on digestive enzymes for other purposes. But whether it's Mazymes or I'm throwing Thorne Biogest in there sometimes. Sometimes I've got some of the Onnit digestive capsules. I've kind of vary all over the place. But you guys have kind of like a suite, like a branded suite, and I like that you're adding this keto one in too. So you could basically have your enzyme for protein-rich meals, your enzyme for the bread, the gluten, and anything that has glyphosate on it, and then your enzyme for the keto. And then if you need a little bit of extra digestive support for a large meal, then you would add in the HCl, right?
Yeah, I think HCl, I think once you're past 35 years old, stomach acids really take a nosedive. So it's a very smart thing to do regardless. And of course, if you don't want to use HCl, apple cider vinegar helps. I mean, that's what it is. Basically, it's an acid, and the malic acid helps with this, basically doing the similar purpose. But if you don't want to take apple cider vinegar every meal or travel with apple cider vinegar, then the HCl breakthrough is the answer.
Okay, got it. Now, while I have you on, I also, I know that you guys have P3OM, which is that strain where you've got something like 2.5 billion CFU of Lactobacillus plantarum in those capsules for the immune system, but then also for the general health of the gut. Now, as far as that one goes, do you take that on an empty stomach at a different time of day, or are you taking that at the same time as you take these enzymes?
Yeah, well, the optimal time to take it, I feel, is before bed or first thing in the morning, and the reason being it's not an implant strain or a colonizer. It's a transient strain, which means it not only just goes into the intestinal tract, but it goes through the whole body and just wipes out bad guys and breaks down undigested protein inside the system. And that's what kind of makes it relatively unique. You can add it in addition with your meals, to augment the breakdown of foods, particularly if you're having a lot of digestive-related illnesses. We suggest that you go with a high dosage of all our products, and then you start to wean yourself off after the symptoms that you're suffering from go away. So they do work independently from each other, but they have a synergistic effect. And a lot of our customers who have problems or significant digestive problems, we just have them reach out to our customer support team, and then we'll kind of help build out what you need to do and for how long until you're symptom free.
Well, and to go on a tangent here, and you were your first when you showed me or showed everybody in the world your Viome test. I got my Viome test, and I talked to Naveen Jain, who actually Wade and I talked to him last year, basically the colonizer myth of probiotics, it seems to be a myth, right? Because almost nobody has any substantial amount of any of these strains. And, people have been taking yogurts and kombuchas and all this stuff, and you're lucky if in the biome test 1 or 2 show up. So I think that the whole colonizer thing is going to be blown out of the water here as awareness. And there was another study that I just saw 3-4 weeks ago, I think out of the UK, and they tested, I think, 55 different probiotics, nothing colonized. And we were aware of transient strains, and we're aware that our strain, what it really does, it goes and eliminates the bad guys. It's really like the Navy SEALs that come in and clean house. So that's really what P3M does. And as Wade said, when you take on an empty stomach, it'll go in, get rid of the bad guys. And it seems to have an incredible effect. I know some people that really had some serious digestive issues that the P3M by itself completely fixed.
But it doesn't actually colonize, is what you're saying.
Correct. And we've always known that about P3M. It's out of the body in about 3 days. Okay.
All right. Got it. But you're saying that would be a good thing that it doesn't colonize?
I'm saying that nothing colonizes.
Okay.
Almost nothing. I mean, as far as commercial probiotics go, yeah. I'm declaring that officially a myth.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. You'd think that at some point someone would figure out a way to deliver a probiotic in a method that actually allows it to colonize or maintain stability in the digestive tract. Like, it doesn't seem like that would be that difficult a job to pull off.
Well, one of the issues with probiotics, and our friend Rhonda Patrick talked about this recently, that if they're not fed what they need to be fed, they start dying off in 24 hours. So just like they need the right food constantly, which is, I think, a big part of the challenge. So even if you do get them in there, are they going to have, I guess, the food they need to survive?
Well, ultimately, I think the big takeaway here is that if you're eating plants, and this is something that I had no clue that if they've been exposed to glyphosate, could downregulate DPP-4 production like that. So, or I'm sorry, it's DPP, not DDP, right? I think DDP is Diamond Dallas Page.
Yeah.
Dipeptidopeptidase. So basically, any plant-based meals that may have been exposed to Monsanto, herbicides, pesticides, glyphosate, any bread, you just pop this stuff before, and you're good to go.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Cool. And I should mention too, I'm not a fan of, and even my cheat days are probably different than yours, Matt. I just cheat on more of the good stuff, like more of the grass-fed, grass-finished ribeye and sweet potato fries, and good organic wine and stuff like that. I don't necessarily go pizzas and Twinkies and stuff like that myself, but I do think that there's a time and a place when you're at a restaurant and they bring out that wonderful artisanal bread, or you're at an Italian and you want to get a side of pasta, with your appetizer salad, or situations where you're not using this, and I don't want to encourage people to go out and just eat crap food. But at the same time, when you find yourself in these situations, even at parties where you want to try little appetizers and you don't know what's in them, or even like last night, I had it because my wife made, we had a pumpkin carving party, and she made like a potato, like a sweet potato. It was almost like a sweet potato pie, but you used spelt in the crust. And for me, I'm really gluten sensitive. So for me, even for something like spelt, I needed to take the Gluten Guardian beforehand. So there's some, quote, healthy, unquote, foods that it comes in handy for as well. Anyways, though, I'm droning on, but what I do have for everybody listening in is a 10% discount. So the 10% discount code is Greenfield, and I'll link to Gluten Guardian, or you can just go to glutenguardian.com/Greenfield, and they've already got a discounted price there, but you knock another 10% off when you use code Greenfield at glutenguardian.com. And when you go there, you probably heard us talking, of course, about P3OM probiotic and Masszymes and some of these others. You can get all of those at that same website just fine. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the code Greenfield will work for any of that stuff, won't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We love Greenfield.
Cool. I like it. All right. So all of that I'll put over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/gluten podcast. And if you find Matt and Wade fascinating, go listen to the other episode where we talk about probiotic enemas. We take a pretty deep dive into some other digestive enzymes in addition to DPP that we need to talk about today, and how Wade bodybuilds on a vegan-based diet and a lot more. So check all of that out as well. I'll link to that at bengreenfieldfitness.com/gluten podcast. And gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this stuff with us. You're allowing a lot of people now to enjoy their Italian restaurants to the fullest.
Yeah, and if everybody wants to go and try the products, we got 2 guarantees. One is a 365-day unconditional money-back guarantee. And then we've got a new thing that we started last year. We haven't really talked about too much publicly, so I think it's the first time we do. We have we'll fix your digestion guarantee. So a lot of times people try a product because they misdiagnose their problems and they might buy the wrong thing. So we're happy to chat with that person and actually send them another one of our digestive solutions for 0 cost. And 95% of the time we found that the second solution fixes their problem. And if that doesn't work, then we'll give them their money back. So as far as we know, no one else is doing this. So it's pretty wild. Pretty cool.
That's a pretty good guarantee. I like it.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. 365 days. Satisfaction or your money back.
And we'll fix your guarantee. Yeah. We'll fix your digestion.
I like it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Matt, Wade, thanks for coming on the show, guys.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, folks. I'm Ben Greenfield along with Matt and Wade signing out from bengreenfieldfitness.com. Have an amazing week. Want more? Go to bengreenfieldfitness.com, where you can subscribe to my information-packed and entertaining newsletter, and click the link up on the right-hand side of that webpage that says Ben Recommends, where you'll see a full list of everything I've ever recommended to enhance your body and your brain. Finally, to get your hands on all of the unique supplement formulations that I personally develop, you can visit the website of my company, Kion, at getkion.com. That's getkion.com.